Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back and happy Friday. Happy eve of spring break. What an exciting time it is to be alive. I hope that you have a wonderful spring break and that you've got some plans to relax and get some rest. I don't really have much in mind. It's pretty nice here, so we'll probably get out and try to enjoy ourselves, but it will be a nice chance to relax and rest. So you should get yourself some R&R. We're going to do a few things today. And the first thing is talk about the response paper assignment. The second thing is finish up our unit on political parties. Now, I want to spend some time talking about the response paper. First and foremost, it was originally due on April 2nd. It's now going to be due on April 9th. I decided that it made sense to give you another week. Um, so you'll have another week. But this assignment, here's the prompt for this assignment, and we'll talk about this piece by piece. In a paper of about 1,250 words, it's like 5 double-spaced pages. You will select 2 or more assigned readings from the syllabus and synthesize them by focusing on one issue, debate, or concept in them. This is not a summary. Concentrate on one theme and make some type of argument or claim about that theme. For example, how certain factors impact democratic institutions or their functions. Your paper should focus on why or how institutions emerge or work as they do. You don't need to include all the readings, but you can't just focus on one. This is going to be due on April 9th. Now, this assignment can be thought of in the following ways. Your response paper really needs 4 things. First, you need to identify an overarching question, issue, debate, or concept in the reading. Now, this is relatively open-ended because you can identify a lot of different questions, issues, debates, or concepts. Really, it's like a repository. Those readings are very, very abundant and lucrative in all of the ideas and questions and debates and concepts they contain. So you can be very, very creative, and I'd like you to. Second, you need to use 2 or more assigned readings in doing so. And so in identifying that question, issue, debate, or concept, you need to be drawing from 2 or more readings. Now, we've done one reading a week, and by the end of the semester, we will have done one each week, so probably 15 or 16 total. So there's a lot for you to choose from. This does suggest that you might need to look ahead or read ahead or consider some of the reading later on in the semester. If you know what you can write about based on the first half of the semester readings and you have enough there, that might be sufficient. The third thing that you must do, present an argument or claim about this issue or concept. So once you've identified that question, issue, debate, or concept, that thing, you need to present an argument or a claim about it. This is a how or why question. It's not a what. We're not interested in mere description or summary. We're interested in an analysis, right? An argument or a claim, a how or a why. And then finally, I want you to defend the argument or claim that you make about this issue or concept. And so you need to develop your argument with evidence or material drawn from those readings that you can use to support your argument or your claim about your issue or concept that you've chosen. So there are a lot of different directions you can go with this assignment. The idea is for it to be relatively open-ended and for you to be able to think creatively in the categories and in the ways that we've thought in class. And so you might have many ideas and you might think about, what would be a strategy for writing an effective paper. And you can discuss that with me if you've got questions, and I'm happy to talk with you. And you certainly have time to develop this. It's still pretty early on, and I'm giving you another week. But do you have any comments or questions about this assignment or about what I'm asking you to do or about the expectations? Jake asks, should we bring in any outside sources? Good question. Um, I don't think it's essential. I really don't. I think I actually want you to focus on the material from the class. And it's a short paper, it's 5 pages. So I think that you can do what you need with the material from class. If you feel like it's useful to do some other reading or consult some other material, please do so, but don't feel required to necessarily. To give you an example of how one might approach this, and this is an example that is not fair game. So you can't use this example as your idea. But if I were to do this assignment, what I would do is my question would be, what is the role of rationality in um, affecting institution creation? And how do rational choice how does rational choice affect institution creation? And I would use the Kaiser and Barzell piece, and I would use the let's see, the Gingrich piece, and I would talk about how rationality can promote institution creation by giving actors a reason to consent to the transition to democracy. So in the case of England, it was the crown rationally choosing to consent to the creation of the parliament because the crown needed money to finance its continued wars, and the elites represented by parliament were threatening to withhold their taxes. In the Gingrich piece, rationality is connected to um, democratic transitions because Gingrich argues that actors consented to democratic transitions when judicial review was included in the package because judicial review provided them with insurance against electoral losses. And so it became rational for them to consent. So that's an approach that I would take to the paper. I just came up with that on the spot. I hadn't thought about that, but that's the kind of thing that you could do. You can pick out, a general issue or question or concept, and you can explore that in the reading, and you can form an argument and then support that argument with material from the reading. And that's a way to approach the paper. And I want you to think creatively when you do this. Think about what interests you. For me, I'm interested in rational choice. I'm interested in how rational choices affect institution creation and how they can alter power relations. I'm interested in those topics. You might be interested in sociological institutionalism and cultural variables. Maybe you're interested in history and timing. It just depends on what you want to do. And I would encourage you to take some time to think about what speaks to you and what motivates you and what excites you about the class. And that's, in my opinion, the best way to approach this kind of thing, to think about what's worth your time, right? And look, we could admit that not everything is equally interesting. So pick something out that you like. Oscar says, for the citation, do you have a preference on the format you want us to use? Just be consistent. Just be consistent. It could be APA or MLA or Chicago or whatever, but just use the same thing. Jeffrey says, would we have to add any argument someone may approach with us and add a rebuttal to their argument? No, it's a short paper, so there's not a lot of space for that. I'm more interested in you addressing these four components and making sure that you have all four of them in your paper. And so this is a test, and this is a set of criteria for you all. When you write your paper, you need to make sure that you have all four of these things. Make sure that you check off all four of them. And if you can, you'll be in a good position. Now, I know that you may have questions that come up as you go along, and that's fine. And I encourage you to use me as a resource and reach out to me and talk to me. I was a writing tutor in college, which, believe it or not, was not a long time ago. And I still love to write, and I write and publish my own work. And so I'm very much interested in how you think about and approach writing papers and how you do that. And I'm happy to work with you and talk to you about that. So use your resources and don't be afraid to ask. Any other comments or questions about this before we continue?
Professor, you said something about future readings. I didn't quite get that. Did you say that we can use readings from after April 9th for
Totally.
this?
Yeah, you can use readings from the whole semester. You just might need to look ahead a little bit if you want to consider, something that we hadn't covered by then, but it's all fair game. I think that there's a lot of room here, everyone. You can do a lot of interesting stuff, and it's just neat, the combinations. And I always enjoy seeing what students come up with because I learn as much about you as I do about the topics that you write about. So, why you chose what you chose is as interesting as what you say about what you chose. So, really embrace this and have some fun with it. Before we continue, Jeffrey said, "How is your child?" So we haven't had the child yet, and I almost actually revealed the details. We know the sex now, and it's very exciting, and we can't wait. But we haven't told people what the sex is, but we're waiting in anticipation, and it's just so exciting, and everything looks great. All the tests are excellent, and the baby appears to be in really good health as far as what they can see and tell. So yeah, we're really really excited on that front, and every single day just gets us closer, and so just very excited. And my parents are going to come and visit us in a couple weeks around my birthday, which is April 9th, actually. And we're very, very excited about that because I haven't seen my family in like a year, like more than a year and a half because of the pandemic. And they've been vaccinated, my parents. So they're going to travel to New York and come see us. And yeah, so it's really, really great. And then, yeah, so just really cool. And thanks for asking, everybody. It's cool. It's so great. Thank you, Kimberly. And thanks, Max. Yeah, we're just like really ready. We're really ready. Tyler says, "How's Bernie?" Bernie is great. He's really good. He's taking a snooze right now. sleeps all the time, but he's really excellent. He's in good spirits. They've been going outside more because it's sunny here. The snow has melted, so they've been enjoying themselves. And me too. You know, it's fun to get outside, get some fresh air, spring thaw. Although allergies are beginning to get bad, so there's that too. Okay, everybody. So as you know, we're talking about political parties, and political parties are important institutions of democracy because, well, in the first place, they structure politics and they connect voters to government. They organize information. They create meaning for us and help to constitute meaning. In the United States, for example, when you go to the polls and vote on election day, the distinction between Democrat and Republican means a lot. And without those labels, you might not have any meaning at all that you can attach to candidates. Politicians also mobilize voters, and parties do too. And parties, of course, support politicians and help them to win elections and to stay in power. But party systems, as sets of parties, differ a lot. And even if parties play an important role in all systems, not all systems are the same. Some systems have many more parties, and some systems have few parties. And some of the most important research in political science and comparative politics has been done on the number of parties in the party system and why some countries have many parties and why some countries have so few parties. And what we've been talking about is how parties are the result, first, of the latent demand for distinctive representation. And then, second, the way that electoral institutions mediate that demand for distinctive representation. So, in any given society, as we saw, there are many different groups who have different attributes and different identities. And the way that the cleavages or the divisions in a society cut, either across or reinforcing, will determine how much distinctive demand for representation there is, or how much demand for distinctive representation there is. A country with cross-cutting cleavages will have more demand than a country with reinforcing cleavages. But even a country with cross-cutting cleavages will be affected by those majoritarian institutions. Remember that majoritarian institutions tend to work against that demand for distinctive representation because they're very disproportional. Proportional representation systems, on the other hand, tend to promote that distinctive demand for representation because there are multiple winners in each district, and they tend to amplify or feed into that distinctive demand. And when we talk about the effect of majoritarian and proportional representation institutions, we're really talking about strategic voting and strategic effect. And we're talking about the way that voters and parties respond to the incentives generated by those electoral institutions. And so that demand for distinctive representation is always tempered by the institutions themselves. And where we left off was discussing the strategic effect of electoral institutions. Jeffrey, R.E. colon means regarding. So in a majoritarian system like the United States, where we have single member districts first past the post voting, as it's called, there's a strong incentive for voters to vote for the candidate they prefer who has a realistic chance of winning. Not their most preferred candidate, but their most preferred candidate who has a realistic chance of winning. Now, think about what that means for a moment. When you went to the polls in 2016, you might have wanted Jill Stein to be elected. And maybe you were nearly willing to vote for Jill Stein, but you ultimately knew that she was unlikely to win. And for that reason, it may have been a wasteful choice to vote for her because it was a single member district. Now, strategic voting is the idea that you only vote for the candidate who has a realistic chance of winning. You might have a preference or a favored candidate, but you ultimately know that they're less likely to win because they're a third party candidate or a small candidate. Strategic entry refers to the same idea, but for politicians. And this has to do with whether they enter politics under the label of their most preferred party or under their most preferred party that has a shot at winning. When you have a single member district, only one candidate wins. Everyone else is eliminated, regardless of how many votes they win. That means that politicians know that if they don't run with a major party, they're unlikely to win. So they have a choice. Do I enter politics with my favorite party? Or do I enter politics under my most preferred party that also has a shot at winning? Voters and parties have this choice. Voters face this choice with regard to who they vote for. Politicians face this choice with regard to which party they run with. Okay, so we're going to do a hypothetical. It's actually not a hypothetical. We're going to use real results. But let's say, for the sake of hypothetical, that we have a reasonably accurate forecast of the election outcome. And that we have a specific preference order. Our first preference is the Labor Party. Our second preference is the Liberal Democratic Party. And our third preference is the Conservative Party. Now, as the voter, we go into the election with this preference order. In an ideal world, we would want to see Labor elected first, Liberal Democrats elected second, and the Conservatives elected third. We go into the election with this preference order. The system is a single member district plurality system. Now, we have a reasonably accurate forecast of the election outcome. These are the results. Assume that we have a reasonably accurate forecast. How would you vote in this election if your preference order is Labor first, Liberal Democrats second, and Conservative third? Tell me via a private message in the chat, okay? We'll take a moment to do this, and then we'll work through it together. Manuel, uh, reconsider. Jeffrey, also reconsider. As a reminder, everyone, we look at this and we make our decision assuming that we have a reasonably accurate forecast of the election outcome. Karen, reconsider. Justin, reconsider. Remember, everyone, that with strategic voting, we vote for our our preferred candidate who has the most likely chance of winning. So it's not our most preferred candidate, it's our preferred candidate who has the most likely chance of winning. So that's acknowledging then that our most preferred candidate may not be the most likely winner. And that instead we should choose the one who we most prefer, but who is also most likely to win, if that makes sense. Okay, everyone. So what you're noticing is that although labor is your first preference, labor doesn't have a realistic chance of winning, right? So we eliminate labor. We take a look at our next preference, liberal Democrat. And the liberal Democrat does have a realistic chance of winning, right? It's neck and neck. It's close. I mean, the conservative wins ultimately. But going into the election, it's a toss-up. We prefer the liberal Democrat over the conservative. So we're going to vote for the liberal Democrat. We eliminate the labor candidate because they don't have a reasonably good chance of winning. The party or the candidate we prefer that has the most realistic chance of winning is the liberal Democrat. So in this case, we would vote for the liberal Democrat. Now, if, say, this was reversed and Stephen War of the Labor Party had 40% and Andrew George of the Liberal Democratic Party had 16%, well, then in that case, we would certainly vote for Labor, right? Because Labor would be our preferred party that has the most realistic chance of winning rather than the Liberal Democratic Party. Does anyone have any questions about strategic voting in a single member district plurality system? Do you see how the institutional setup encourages voters to vote strategically or to sort of eliminate their most preferred candidate if that candidate does not have a chance of winning? This is why we call it strategic voting, because voters respond to the electoral system. They don't vote for their most preferred candidate if that candidate does not have a chance of winning. Instead, they vote for their preferred candidate who has the most likely chance of winning. And in this case, that's the liberal Democrat. Jeffrey says, so you have to basically vote for the one with the closest beliefs to ours and have some of our preferences. So Jeffrey, we always have a preference order. In the rational choice mindset, voters, or any actor for that matter, always has a set of preferences or a rank list, a ranking of their preferences. And we rank them according to, any reason or any reason why we prefer them. Why we prefer them might be a separate question, actually. We might prefer them for any number of reasons, but we make choices about who we vote for from among our preferred candidates based upon who has the most likely chance of winning, if that makes sense. So we might prefer them for any number of reasons. It's just that we select the one that we select. We vote for the one that we vote for based upon which preferred candidate has the most likely chance of winning. And so, for instance, you could prefer candidates because they have policies that you like, or because you like their personality, or whatever. It really is more of an issue of strategic voting and ruling out preferred candidates based on their likelihood of winning. A majoritarian system is going to really force voters or strategic voters to choose between really two choices ultimately. Now, strategic entry relates to the choice available to a politician, right? So there's the voter and then there's the politician. And the politician's perspective is just as interesting as the voters. And so we're going to do another hypothetical. And this is a question. You are an aspiring politician, and your thing is environmental politics. You're very much devoted to environmental protection and reducing the carbon footprint and so on. But you have a dilemma. The Green Party shares your policy preferences most closely, but you are unlikely to get elected with the Green Party under the single member district plurality system because the Green Party does not have a realistic shot at winning. So my question for you is, can you better further your environmental policy agenda by running with the Green Party or running with a different party? Who should you run with? Tell me in a private message using the chat. Jeffrey, it doesn't have to be the US. It can be any country with a single member district plurality system. It's a hypothetical. So imagine the US if that's helpful, but it can be any country, really. So we're getting some interesting input here, and I'm very interested to see some of the responses. So some of you are saying run with a different party. So who should you run with? Yeah, a lot of really good points here in the chat. Totally. Many of you are saying with a different party. So, and I'm gonna read some of these comments because some of these are really good, and they're all good. But Efren says, for example, I would run with a different party that has a realistic shot at winning. Uriel says, I would run with a leftist party. A different party, says Samantha. Jake says Democratic Party. Oscar says run with a different party. Nina says, I believe running with a party that has a chance of success is better than staying with the Green Party because the chances of your agenda were being fulfilled is more likely than if the ideas were pushed in the Green Party. Yeah. And what's interesting, Nina and others, is that it's sort of like a balancing act, right? Like running with that other party is an option, but you might have to moderate your agenda and kind of water down or limit how aggressive you are in your call for policy reform. And so you might not be much of an environmentalist when you're all said and done with it. At the same time, if you remain that full-blooded environmentalist and you run with the Green Party, you are very unlikely to get elected at all. And you might have very little influence on the policy agendas of other candidates who do better than you in the race. And so you're really stuck with this unfortunate choice between two unpalatable options. A, stay the course, don't get elected, and remain toiling in obscurity, or B, moderate your position, run with a mainstream party, and achieve very little ultimately in the way of your original objectives. Really, really challenging and really undesirable alternatives. And I think that the question for a politician is how much am I willing to give up in terms of my objectives and values and and well, how capable am I of potentially succeeding under a third party if I'm unwilling to moderate my position? And so it's just a difficult position for a politician. Jeffrey says, Karen says, because the Green Party is recognized, it might be better to run with them and possibly help it build more popularity. Possibly, Karen, possibly. But if you want to get elected, right, if your objective is to get into power, well, in a single member district plurality system with single member districts and all you have to have is a plurality to win, you're unlikely to get elected with the Green Party, right? So maybe you should run with someone else. Jeffrey, do you want to make a comment?
Yeah, I was gonna say that I wanted to ask, do you think that's why the Democratic Party and the Republican Party have sort of like expanded because you have some conservatives that are more libertarian, and then you have some people within the Democratic Party that are more pushing the like the Green Party agenda that are pushing for more environmental policies, and then you have some Democrats that are not willing to go that far, but they're still running with the Democratic Party.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it has a lot to do with the electoral institutions. And, remember M plus one equals two, right? When M is one. And we have an M of one in the US, we have a district magnitude of one. And so I think that that's a lot of the reason why the parties are so large and why they're so broad. They're catch-all parties, right? And we have an effective number of parties of two. And those parties are quite large and they have quite a bit of range within them in terms of like ideology. There's a big difference, for example, between Joe Manchin, the senator from West Virginia, the Democratic, center right senator from West Virginia, and say, like a blue-blooded progressive senator who's on the other side of the spectrum. And so in a single member district plurality system, that's what you wind up with, because politicians who want to get into power have to run to the center and have to run under those large parties. And so those parties wind up being catch-all parties where they're not very narrow in terms of like their ideology and their platform. They're actually relatively large and broad in terms of the range of beliefs and attitudes and preferences that they represent. And frankly, that might also be unpalatable and undesirable, from our perspective, if we want distinctive representation and if we want parties that can, meaningfully represent, you know, specific groups of Americans or specific groups of citizens. And so what I'd like you to notice from this is that majoritarian institutions come with a lot of strings attached. You might avoid the risk of extreme parties on the margins, but you also risk creating these catch-all parties that are so overly broad that they lose any meaning and that they wind up being these lethargic, uh, these broad in scope entities that that really become overwhelmingly broad. And so sometimes that's a serious issue with a single member district plurality system. Carlos says running with the Green Party would focus on those specific environmental politics issues more so than another party. Right, Carlos? But if you can't get elected, you might not be able to do anything with that agenda anyway. Yeah, Karen, totally. Karen says, now I get why people said voting for Jill Stein would waste votes. For sure, because it's extremely difficult to get elected under a third party in a single member district plurality system. Single member districts, they punish those small parties. And so if you vote for those third party candidates, you're taking votes away from those large party candidates, and you're giving them to candidates that may be unlikely to win. And in that regard, you may be effectively wasting your vote, as they say. But it may also come down to principle and what you care a lot about. And some voters care a lot about principle, and for them it matters more. But in terms of a purely rational choice and from a purely functional perspective, strategic voting dictates that you should vote for your preferred candidate who has the most likely chance of winning. Michael says in the Senate there are 2 independents, but they vote with Democrats. For sure. And they don't represent a distinctive party, do they? They certainly don't really broaden the distinctiveness of the representation. So here's the thing. Politicians in proportional systems don't face this trade-off. They don't have to moderate their position to the same degree. They don't necessarily have to run under the umbrella of a larger party just to get elected. It's not necessary. They can run with a smaller party, and they can often stay the ground, stay the course, and they can have a little bit of electoral success and usually win some legislative seats. And more importantly, they can become kingmakers in the government formation process if they have a little bit of electoral success and they can win those seats. And so politicians need not sacrifice many of their principles, and they need not run with those large parties in order to win. And as a result, there's much more representation and much more distinctive representation typically in proportional representation systems. And so with an M of 5 or 6, you've got an effective number of parties of 6 or 7, according to Duverger's theory. Now, it's not always perfect, but generally speaking, this does work out in practice. You look across the board and you notice that proportional systems tend to have more parties. Majoritarian systems tend to have fewer parties. And what this means is that disproportional systems like the United States, they have a really, really hard time supporting small parties. They don't attract good candidates and resources, and they're just not likely to form in the first place. Because let's face it, if you're the Green Party or the Socialist Party in the United States, you're just not going to win. unless there's a sea change in the political environment, unless there's some sort of a crisis, it's very unlikely that you will win. And even if you win a district or two, it's not likely that on a national level you will alter the balance of power. And so disproportional systems are far less likely to lead to more parties. They're much more likely to have fewer parties. Majoritarian systems tend to have fewer parties. And in the end, M+1 might be the single best and most effective uh, predictor for the number of parties in a country. And so in the United States, M+1 is one plus one, it's two. In Chile, it's 2 plus 1, and it would predict 3. And in fact, there are 2 large coalitions. There are many small parties, but there are about 2.5 party coalitions. So generally speaking, Duverger's law is a useful way for us to predict the number of parties in a party system, and it's a useful way for us to understand how parties structure politics in a given democratic political system. And this is, I think, the conclusion of our discussion about political parties as institutions of democracy. I did have in mind some discussion questions that I thought could promote conversation for us. And those are the following questions, but we don't have time to discuss them. So what I think I'll do is I'll leave them with you, and we may revisit them in the future. But for now, I'll let you go. I hope that you have a wonderful break and that you get some rest and that you relax. But otherwise, I'll see you on the other side. Have a good one.